Well, hi everyone. I wanted to do a quick update on this train derailment that occurred a couple of weeks ago. I'm recording this video on Wednesday, February 11th, 2026. And a few days after I did that video, the contractor, the specialty contractor, was able to get the locomotives re-railed and off the trestle bridge. And they did this by constructing a work trestle adjacent to the railroad trestle, which I covered in the previous video. And they brought in these dozers with side lifting devices in combination with a crane to lift and reorient the locomotives back onto the track. And we're able to move it on down the line. But what I want to address in this video is a comments made by several of you that you couldn't understand how an old wood trestle could support the weight of two locomotives and a slug. And a number of you clarified the weights of these locomotives for me. I'm no rail expert. I'm an expert on deep foundations for bridges and other infrastructure projects. That's what I do in life, in my business. So I want to run through conceptually what the capacity would be for the timber pile foundations that continue up to form the trestle for this railroad bridge and illustrate that there's plenty of geotechnical resistance, that is, capacity of the piling to support this trestle with both locomotives and a slug. In fact, there's plenty of capacity to support even much larger locomotives, perhaps going back to the steam era, where those locomotives typically weighed a lot more than what these did in this situation. So let's go through this real quick. Let's look at the geotechnical capacity of these timber pile. So timber pile are really tree trunks where the branches have been cut off and the top of the tree, or the narrower, pointier end, goes on the bottom, and the top of the pile is called the butt, and they drive it into the ground with typically an impact hammer, diesel, hydraulic, or even a gravity drop hammer. And just looking at this footage from Mr. Vogel, I want to thank him again for allowing me to utilize his footage in these videos. He's local to the area and did great drone work here. But looking at his footage, there are 12 substructures, so 12 piers, if you will, with 5 piles each. And then let's add the abutment on either end, so 14 substructures. So typically a timber pile has an allowable loading that can be applied, which is a combination of what historically you could develop from the soil, but also the structural capacity of the wood itself. And the maximum loading that you'd be allowed to put on the piling would be 30 tons or 60 kips. A kips is 1,000 pounds. So if we take the equivalent of 70 piles, and I know some of these piers had multiple pile, but they were really close together, I think mostly to improve lateral capacity more so than axial capacity. So for simplicity, let's just take 5 piles per substructure. That'd be a total of 70 piles. So each pile has a total capacity from a geotechnical standpoint, typically of 120 kips. So you'd use a factor of safety of 2, so the allowable would be 60 kips, which matches our allowable structural capacity. So we're looking at allowable 60 kips of applied loading, which can be reliably developed through soil resistance, mostly along the sides of the pile. And if we look at the total substructure capacity, we take our 70 piles times our 60 kip allowable capacity, that's 4,200 kips allowable capacity, even though the total geotechnical resistance would be around 8,400 kips. So from a soil resistance standpoint, the bridge, if it's able to uniformly distribute the loading from the locomotives on the rail to the substructure of the bridge, that is the piling, in a uniform manner, the total allowable capacity would be 4,200 kips. So if we look at the weight of the locomotives, around 250,000 pounds each, 250 kips. So 2 times 250, that's 500 kips, plus say 200 kips or 200,000 pounds for the slug. So that's 700,000 pounds or 700 kips. So that's 1/6 of the allowable geotechnical capacity that could be developed by the bridge substructure. So we could apply 6 times the actual train weight here on this bridge And again, assuming there's no structural deterioration such that this applied loading could be uniformly distributed to the bridge foundation, there's plenty of excess capacity here, which is really amazing. And of course, the Romans pioneered the use of timber piles to support overlying structures. And I think it's very interesting. But I wanted to go through that just from a conceptual standpoint, just to let people know who may not be familiar with capacities of piling, driven piling, that that's not the weak point of this bridge. Not an issue here. I hope you found that to be interesting. Let me know if you have any questions by leaving a comment. With that, I want to thank those of you who've contributed to buy me a coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to thank the channel members who typically preview these videos 1 or more days in advance. And I also want to thank those of you who've contributed to super thanks, additional great ways to support the channel. So I've got a variety of interesting topics coming up on this channel, so please stay tuned, everyone.